today. I know Maya said she was unable to make it due to a conflict, but we'll go and get started. So we have quite a few things to cover here in the agenda. So there's kind of an overall theme, basically just trying to get our general governance here sort of figured out and finalized. So we'll start with Dan. You had put the role of the TAC. I think this is a great way to just start off, sort of recenter, figure out exactly where we want this to go, and that'll help dictate some of these other things. So we can talk about that real quick, and then we'll kind of work into some of the working group updates that we've got as far as updating READMEs and governance models and things like that. And then Kay, I know you put in the 1029 planning milestone, which I think will cover a lot of the stuff leading into that, but I just copied wholesale what you had there, so we can just kind of pick through what makes sense to cover again. So with that, Dan, did you have ideas on this that you wanted to start with, or just kind of open it up for conversation?
Yeah, just open it up. I guess if there's one kind of big high level thing to discuss, it's kind of just how hands-on I guess we want to be for TAC and what the working groups are doing, how much oversight we want to be playing, how active, versus just kind of helping the working groups with whatever they're doing, and figuring out ways to help along. Maybe that's not like a good way to paint it as one versus the other, but I guess, yeah, just what are the things we want to provide oversight with versus just be more hands-off.
Yeah, so I see it, my personal opinion on this is that I see it a couple of ways. Like, our initial goal is to kind of help set direction, right? So we should be looking at what our overarching strategy is. So we had I've been thinking about this the past couple of weeks, because we had the governing board strategies committee that was a little bit focused on that and has pivoted more towards this planning PR, but there's definitely some relationship there, because whatever we're planning in that group obviously is affected by the strategy of this group. So I think we need to get a little bit more crisp, maybe helping to identify some basic themes. I think just looking at the working groups that we have currently, there's certainly like this identify, educate type role going on a couple groups, and then we've got this sort of action-based thing on the other groups, like around securing critical projects and developing tooling. So if we kind of identify those, and then once we have that sort of vision going forward, I think it'll help with deciding where new working groups might fit in, and how they sort of work together. And then once we have that, I think our role is very hands-off in terms of how the working groups operate. I think we should sort of let them be. Once we've identified what their direction is and it makes sense, overall, and that it's accruing to the right thing, just let them go operate. And then when they have questions, we can kind of be the liaison between the governing board, and then we can help them figure out funding. We can help them, spin up technical resources, things like that. But other than that, and facilitate, updates and that sort of thing. But I think our role should be largely hands off and let them operate as they see fit. And of course, check-ins and things like that. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi. On this note, it's still a little unclear to me the boundaries between the role of the TAC, the role of the governing board, and the role of the strategy committee in practice. I was wondering if we could maybe flesh that out a little bit. I don't know if I'm the only one that's a little bit feeling like there's a Venn diagram here, and it might make sense to shake it out more specifically.
I think you're absolutely right. There is a bit of a Venn diagram right now. And I think part of that problem exists because the TAC as it exists right now is bootstrapped. And so a lot of the members that are in governing board are also in the TAC. And so that creates a little extra confusion. I think as noted in Dan's mail about the governing board TAC rep, he's the only one currently that even is qualified to be that, because everybody else is already a governing board member, or we have two companies there. So yeah, certainly there's a lot of overlap. But I think my understanding of the separation here is governing board is largely in existence to do things like the more kind of administrative things. There's budgeting things that happen there, and there's marketing that happens, the overall organizational type work, bylaws, that sort of thing. TAC is more technically focused, and so that's where we're oversight for the working groups and technical initiatives and making sure that all makes sense. And of course, there's a rep for the governing board to make sure that kind of the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. And then as far as that committee goes, that kind of got started at the governing board side, and then, but I think it was sort of brought up that the TAC was really the one that was responsible for that, and so we sort of shifted those gears a little bit and added the rest of the TAC in, and so now there's this sort of overlap thing. So that's probably part of why the confusion exists. But I think going forward, once we have final TAC and governing board, there'll be more separation there, and it might become more clear. But right now, definitely a very large Venn diagram, I think. So.
Yeah,
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I think at high level that makes a lot of sense and is very close to the spirit of what we talked about in the beginning. But when once you start to get into the implementation details, I feel like there's a lot of crosstalk, and it's probably directly a function of the fact that we are participants in so many groups. But it might be interesting to go through a bunch of and I don't know if here is the form for that, but go through a bunch of canonical tasks that come up over and over again within these groups and figure out which ones are really the realm of the governing board, which ones are really the realm of the TAC, whether the strategy committee is overlapping with some of that, just because I feel like I don't know where to bring different issues to different things. But if I'm alone in that, I certainly don't want to take up our time here. Maybe someone can connect with me offline. I just feel a little bit not calibrated and not sure where certain things are going. And I've heard agenda items come up in different groups where I thought, oh, I thought that was that other one. So I'm just kind of spun around on where to take different topics.
I think it's absolutely fair. I've encountered it as well. I've definitely seen some duplication in multiple threads, multiple groups, multiple repos for sure. I know we have similar issues that are being tracked in a couple of different places. I agree. There's definitely overlap there, and I think a lot of it will get resolved over time just as these decisions get made. And it probably is beneficial to at least create a doc somewhere that has a table. It says governing board, these types of things, TAC, these types of things, and then we can just kind of have that there. And then if it comes up, go, okay, let's use that as a way to try to defer some of those conversations if they pop up in the wrong forum. But for now, because most people are kind of sitting in both, it's probably not terrible. But for going forward, I think it does make sense to make that separation clear.
Cool.
So I asked Max Sills, who's one of Google's open source lawyers, kind of his thoughts on this, and because he's involved in tons of different foundations and stuff on Google's behalf, and he said that I think he put it really well. The role of the governing board in general in most of these groups is to do two things. To manage budget and then to delegate all of the other things to other groups. And so I don't know quite how accurate that is, but that seemed to be his kind of put it in one sentence. And so I think if you look at the charter, all of the oversight for technical stuff has been delegated to the TAC. And we don't really have a ton else going on right now because there is no budget. So I think that might be why some of the Venn diagram is overlapping and confusing right now, because we're trying to figure out all of the other things that exist and can be delegated and who should be doing which things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might just put in the chat too, something I think that pretty much maybe summarize what you just said, Dan, in a little bit more detail. But TAC is around coordinating all technical work, right? And the board isn't really anything about the work that's happening. It's budget, marketing, trademarks, that kind of stuff.
Right, but for example, the press releases that to make sure that people are aware of this is something I think the governing board's involved in.
Yeah, I guess it's at that level of analysis where I'm getting lost. If we're working on outreach activities for people at conferences, would that happen in a working group, in the TAC, in the strategy committee, or in the governing board? Or I know that we've had discussions, but some are more and less complete in different forums around new joiners to the group, new members of OpenSSF. If we were one item I'd like to raise is around organizing a research workshop around these topics, and I don't know whether to raise that again at the governing board, at the TAC, somewhere else. And I feel like there's just a bunch of things we're coming up against around setting our goals, and some of them are technical in flavor, and is that governing board or TAC, or do we need the separate strategy committee? So I think for me it's just kind of putting that into the different tables in a chart and just making sure that we're all on the same page where those things go.
Yeah, that sounds
I think
good.
it
I
would
mean,
be
I
a
could
good
take a
exercise
stab
to
at.
talk through. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say I could take a stab at putting that into a document and then share it out. We can just all kind of be on it and work through
Yeah, I was
ideas.
going to say, I think it would be a useful exercise to go through those concrete examples you brought up too.
Dave, I think you're talking on mute. I see you talking. I don't hear anything.
Okay, well, didn't we just talk about that? All right, who just spoke that said they were going to try to capture all that?
I said I could put it into a document that we can start up.
Okay.
Brian.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm still learning to recognize voices. So, okay. So Ryan will work out a summary of the various roles.
Yes.
And post. Okay. I have the superpower of typing on keyboards.
Say, and thank you again for doing the notes. I am terrible at note taking during meetings.
Well, I will claim no actual superpower, but I figured I would type that one down.
That's good. Thank you. All right. So do we feel comfortable with this particular item so far, as sort of at least general, that we can define this and kind of move on from here? Is everybody good with this?
I think we do have a couple concrete examples later in the agenda. I don't know if we want to change things around by moving those up. I don't really care either way, but like a lot of the stuff around the OSSF, CII, LF consolidation, I think are kind of pose some interesting questions about where they should be handled.
In terms of whether they should be handled in governing board versus TAC?
Yeah, versus working groups.
Oh, versus working groups. Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's. Let's see here.
But yeah, fine if we want to wait till later.
Yeah, for flow wise, let's get through these other things really quick because I think those might take on a longer discussion. So, so the next thing on here is we need to fill out the governing board TAC rep. Dan, I think by default that's you. Does anybody have any issue with that, or can we go ahead and move on?
I just wanted to double check my interpretation correctly.
Okay, Dan, you're official. All right, you are the governing board TAC representative. All right, and then the next one is we need to come up with the community individual representative. So I think this is pretty open to thoughts here. We can hold a poll if people have suggestions of who it might be, if they've worked with anybody that they're interested in having. I think this is pretty wide open at the moment.
How soon are you supposed to name that person?
Yeah, so this is somebody that we need to pull in. I mean, it could be somebody that you know, is actively involved in OpenSSF or not. It's basically they're a non-member, right? But they'd be attending TAC meetings with a vested interest to help strategize with us and help us, you know, reach out to community, you know, that sort of thing. Be sort of that community expert. So nomination, but obviously we don't want to nominate people we haven't spoken with. So.
Yeah, depending on how urgent you feel for that, it might be worth time to just see kind of who emerges in the community that's active, that isn't affiliated already with some kind of membership.
So
I'm going to click on that issue because I think there's some context in there. There is a date, and I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Dan had put together sort of reverse schedule in the GitHub issue that lists, okay, so we have 10/29 as that press release. And if you work back for the times of nominations and voting and all that kind of stuff, basically we need to try to come up with somebody like this week. So
I think this one is actually a hard deadline. I don't think we can push this one because this is, to be clear, this is a representative on the governing board from the community, and the governing board had something in the charter saying they had to name this person by a certain date. If I believe.
Aren't there two? We have one for governing board and one for TAC.
No. So there's.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the TAC needs to nominate or name a representative to sit in on the governing board and report from the TAC pardon me, periodically, as well as communicate back to the TAC anything that the board wants to communicate. So it's that lifeline between the TAC and the board. The other role that I think is being collapsed into this is there is a provision, and I'd have to pull up the actual charter, but there's a provision in the charter that says that you'll have somebody representing the community that isn't a member. In other words, you want an independent, an individual that's in the community on the TAC.
Right. So the first example that you gave, that's Dan. All right.
That's Dan, right? And so that's done, right? So.
Right. So now we're discussing the community person, but that's
right. And
TAC,
that's,
and then Dan was saying,
right.
is that governing board as well, or that's where the confusion?
No. It's just for the TAC. It's just.
We should pull up the issue because Kay opened the issue. It's number 22, and it is pretty clear. It says fill governing board security community rep in the title. So maybe we have to pull up the charter.
Yeah.
Well, that's I've seen both, and that's why I've been confused. The naming gets moved back and forth. So is it that the TAC is identifying the person that fills the governing board seat? Is that?
That's right.
But this is the community member, not
the TAC rep.
Not the TAC rep, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the spirit of having a community member, like the goal we were trying to achieve initially, was that this would increase kind of diversity and representation on the board, specifically around members of the community who, would provide a valuable insight as being open source contributors, but maybe have a different perspective or different kind of set of experiences, as is more typical for the folks in the governing board or in the TAC. So we're really just looking to see if this seat could be used to find someone that kind of represents open source from a different angle, if that makes sense. I don't quite know how to phrase it, but it was really around bringing in a different and valuable viewpoint into the governing board.
Yeah, I definitely remember that. So I think keeping that in mind, so Kay, you had mentioned here in the issue a proposal around anyone who subscribed to at least one mailing list can self-nominate, anyone who subscribed can vote. So I guess we need to send a mail out requesting nominations, and you can self-nominate or nominate someone else and then hold a vote and go from there. What do folks think of that? And we could do that by using Dan's timeline here. We could send out the mail in the next few days and then get that initial set and set out a poll.
Yeah, so I think just to extra clarify while we're here, I think technically it's up to the governing board to decide how they want to do this. And it sounds like from this issue that the governing board is requesting the tax help basically to identify the people that should be able to vote.
So we'll provide the nomination list essentially, and then the governing board will handle the actual.
Yeah, or I mean, they could delegate it all to us, but I think technically it's up to them to figure out on the governing board.
Yeah, I would like to delegate it all to the TAC. It isn't clear in the charter which way it would go, but I think because this is intended to be someone that is coming more from the technical side or the community, the hands-on working side, I think it makes sense for it to come from the TAC. We could clarify that at the governing board meeting later this week, but I believe that was how we discussed it at the last governing board meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then just one other thing before we move on a little bit, I think somebody had mentioned the point of getting a community person on the TAC as well. I think that was you, Chris. That I think would fall under the other charter piece, which says the TAC is supposed to figure out long-term TAC membership. So I think that is still possible and is still in scope. We just have to define that, but that has a later due date, so nobody has started looking into that yet.
Okay, so I mean that all sounds great. So let's plan on 9/25. We can send out an email announcement a few days by the end of the week. We'll get that out there, start collecting that initial set. and then we will hopefully have a list that we can then vote on, and we'll get that figured out. Looks like by next week or so.
And does anybody know if that actually is a hard deadline? I think it is. It's not just governed by that press release, right? I think the press release is actually governed by the hard deadline.
The hard deadline for the press release is to identify the 3 additional members from the membership. So we have 5 total additional members that we need to put on the governing board. 3 are from the membership, and that's the hard deadline. The other 2, the TAC and the individual community representative, I don't believe that there's a hard deadline specified in the charter, but I would prefer that we do it all at once if we can. And
sure. Okay, but if, say, nobody nominates themselves or something, we don't have to go pick somebody randomly.
I don't believe so. I can look at it again, but yeah.
Thanks, Kay. Okay, all right, so we'll get that process rolling. Then the next thing in the agenda is some working group updates. So I've reached out to all the old OSSE working group leads. So those are the best practices, vulnerability disclosure, tooling, and identifying security threats working groups. I've invited them to this meeting. Most of them said that they wouldn't be able to make it today, but they would be attending the next one. And they've also been informed that we need to get updates as far as where they're at. So for those that aren't aware, previously in OSSE with these same working groups, we sort of had a quarterly sync up where all the leads would get together, provide status updates on direction, if they've had any updates in that, and then where they're at, and new objectives, what they've accomplished, that sort of thing. And then that all sort of accrued to this. Eventually we'd have the entire org would get together and have presentations on it. But that sort of kept everybody in sync. So I want to use or leverage this meeting, at least portions of it at times, to have the working group leads come in and give their updates as well on some sort of regular cadence. So they're aware of that, they're kind of prepping for it. And then sort of a related thing is they're aware of, we need to start formalizing these working groups and initiatives, making sure, right now everything's listed as incubating, and on the TAC repo, we say that they're approved, though technically they haven't gone through any of the process. So we need to go through that process. So I've submitted a pull request on the README. We don't have to go through it here. I can highlight in the doc real quick some of the things that I added to it and subtracted, but if people can go look at that in comments, it's highlighted here. So they're aware that once this gets finalized, they'll need to go through and fill out the updated READMEs, and then that's what we'll use to go through the actual process, and we'll start that by this next meeting, hopefully. They should be ready for that. So real quick, I'm gonna say, so this is the doc version that's easier just to look at real quick. But there were a lot of comments that were put in on this issue, both from Dan and Kay and Maya and others. Some really great feedback. So this is just, again, I don't want to dive into this too much because I know we have more to cover, but we talked a lot about, we need a description. We need to talk about what the motivation for this working group is. What's the history of it? What's the use case that we're trying to solve? Be very clear about what the objectives are. So what are we trying to achieve? Do we have OKRs listed for these things? Defining the scope, what's in and out of scope specifically. One that I saw in one of the working groups that was great was the prior work. So this could be optional. There's a lot of working groups we have right now that have other initiatives that people bring up. Oh, have you talked to this group, or have you heard about this project or that thing? We should list those here if they're available. And if we're involved and engaged with those groups, we should mention that as well. So that's sort of the background, what that working group's all about. And then there's okay, now how do I get involved in this thing? So we should have very clear guidelines. Some of these have started to happen and taken shape on some of the READMEs I've noticed, but again, the formatting is inconsistent. So we need to solidify on this. So list of the mailing lists. If there's Slack channels to join, we need to put that there. If there's other information we should have as well. A quick start, I think, for a lot of these. So some projects are going to have actual code. So we should have sort of quick build information, how to, what languages are involved, just all the background of how to get involved in a project, areas that they might need contribution and help. Where do they file issues? Right now everybody's using GitHub issues, but if for some reason in the future a working group has some other thing for some reason, we should list that information here. And then the meeting times, be very clear about what the actual cadence of meetings are. Like right now, I think some people say, okay, every Friday or whatever, or every third Thursday, but they don't dictate when it starts. So we need to be clear about what that is, and then a link to the actual calendar invite, and then the meeting minutes. And then lastly is the governance. So we can list out a link to the charter and then who's leading these particular working groups if people need to reach out to them. So any quick comments on that? But like I said, there is a pull request, so feel free to go have a conversation there as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think this is a great start. Thanks for putting it together. I mean, one of the other questions we'll have to figure out after we get everybody to fill this out the first time is kind of what the update cadence is and how people go about making changes to it. A point in time snapshot is definitely a great start, but I think we probably want it to be more living, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So like, this will be the README on the repo. So as things change, they should update these things. The other part too, and I wanted to ask this group, was where we should have the working groups fill out their sort of updates. So like, for example, the best practices group, they have a markdown file where they put all their meeting notes and they list them by date, right? So you can kind of go through them. I was considering doing something similar, but I don't know if it makes sense to have it centralized on the TAC repo, or if we just want to have them put it in a common location, like we create a folder in everybody's repo that says updates, and then every quarter that's where they put what they've done and where they're at and if direction's changing, and then we pull those together either on the OpenSSF website or on the TAC repo, so that there's a centralized place for it. My concern here that I want to solve is that I don't want to be putting these things in 5 different places, right? And so wherever it's convenient for the working group leads to put that information and then pull it together is what I prefer to do. So if anybody has thoughts and suggestions on that, definitely open for discussion, but that's the direction I'd like to take it.
When is the first time we'd be collecting those updates? I don't think we're a full quarter in yet, but it's probably coming up soon.
Yeah, so they're starting now. So in the communication I had with them last week, as part of filling out the README and everything, they're also going to do some updates, and I told them sort of TBD about where to put it. So knowing that, yeah, we're coming up by that 10/29, that kind of puts us around the quarter. And then I know the press releases from then on are going to be every quarter, correct, Kay? Correct me if I'm wrong. So that sort of gives us that quarterly cadence to provide updates.
Yeah, I don't think we've settled on that. That's been the direction I've been hoping we'd go, but we should plan on that until we know unless we decide otherwise.
Okay, yeah, and that's what we did previously. Like I said, in OSSC, and it seemed to be a pretty good amount of time. It wasn't too frequent, and then also didn't get too late. So
something lightweight that works pretty well, I guess, for some internal organizations I'm in is, every quarter or every month or so, somebody just starts an empty document with, the section for each team or group and says, add your stuff here, and everybody adds their stuff there, and then somebody can kind of collate it all and curate it and edit it up in that document. And then it goes out in like some monthly or quarterly email. Yeah,
so I guess that's kind of the same idea process-wise, but also trying to maybe automate it a little bit more to where like that's essentially what they would do, but it would all be done in some spot that could be shown on the working group repo. So if somebody was interested in a working group, they could go and see what's been happening and where they're at. And also if somebody's just browsing, say, the TAC repo and trying to get a general overview, they could click on one and go, oh, okay, that's where this group's at, that's where this other group's at. So kind of the same idea that they'd all be collated eventually, but I don't know if it makes sense to do that centrally to start off with, or to have a tool that pulls them together. I know Luke had mentioned in the previous meeting, we talked about having sort of some metadata files that we could pull from. maybe we could leverage a tool like that that sort of pulls things together.
Yeah, I think it was Mark that was looking at that. So just a quick thought, just as an individual, not as a governing board member, is it seems clear. It seems like it would be pretty clean if we had each group do it in their own. So we have created a Google Drive folder for each of the working groups now. I don't think they're all putting documents in it currently, but that could be a place where a document gets started, and maybe use the same name or same folder name or something. So anyway, so the individual working group could put their content there, and then as we're rolling up, so if there's a TAC roll up from that, the TAC can pull that together and maybe create a collated document if they want it, or maybe just a file that has links to each working group's updates. And then we could use that same information as we're planning for the press releases for each quarter. But probably we'd do another collate and wordsmith and such for the press releases.
So that actually brings up sort of, I guess, maybe a more fundamental question. Do people have a preference around whether these updates are stored in a document or if they're stored in like a markdown file in the repo? Because I sort of made the assumption that we would put them in the markdown files on the repo because they're more easily accessible. But if a document's easier for people to sort of party on together, that's fine too.
Kind of like the repo idea that you could then manage. You can manage these updates like you would release notes. I mean, not everybody manages their release notes in their repo, but that would give you a pretty structured way across everything. And then as far as like trying to correlate all those or collate those with each of the working groups, right now we only have 6 working groups. So I think coming up with a big automation scheme for a handful of projects might not be necessary in the end.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that was kind of my thought too, is that it's just easier to put it on the repo. It could also be we start with the doc and then it's published to the repo, in a markdown file, if it's easier for people just to edit in the doc, and then somebody, myself or somebody else, can kind of publish that on the regular cadence. So.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's used HackMD in a community you're a part of, but as far as having a markdown syntax but collaboratively edited doc, they now have GitHub integration where you can then push the result to that to a repo. Anyway, it's something that maybe fits kind of both collaborative editing, but gives you a way to easily put it in a GitHub repo.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I haven't used that before. Well, I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, they've been using, some of the groups in the Confidential Compute Consortium have been using that. It seems pretty accessible.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that or preferences? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll formalize that a little bit more, and then get the working group leads involved, and we'll continue on. And then, Kay, as you mentioned, the summaries that come out of that stuff will get used for the 1029 press release, which brings us to the 1029 planning milestone. Okay, do you want to give an update on this for everybody?
Yeah, so I don't have this as an update. I more was just listing out the things so in that separate group, the strategy group, we've identified that we're working toward a press release. And here I was just trying to list out the things that I think we need from either the governing board or the working groups. So the 2 of them we talked about at the top, so the TAC representative and the security community representative. And so, sounds like people have those and will take action on them, so perfect. Another thing that we'll be doing is announcing that we're hoping to do is announce the consolidation of CII and Linux Foundation security efforts with OpenSSF. And so there is an issue on the TAC about that. I think the way that the issue is worded is review working group proposals. So the proposed, so David Wheeler, thank you kindly, David, put together a really great proposal. So he outlined the things that are, the projects that were part of the CII, which is no longer currently active, but got started under the CII, and some are still loosely under the name of the CII. And we, sort of as a strategic direction, which we announced in our first press release, and we want to consolidate that work with OpenSSF. So David has listed those things and made recommendations for which working groups they might belong under. And David has been driving a couple of these. So we have already agreed to include the edX course with the best practices working group. And then the badge program, David, do you want to update on where, I don't know if we have got an issue somewhere tracking that, but we're thinking we want it to be in the identifying security threats working group.
Well, that's one of the proposals there. So the CI best practices badge has been around for a number of years. There's two different working groups where it would make sense to put under the identifying security threats, which does a lot of the metrics, and the best practices, which does a lot of the education. Because it's got such a emphasis on the metrics, I thought the identifying security threats might be the better fit. But they're both reasonable, and I think no matter what, both working groups should be involved in changes to the criteria in the future. Probably just having hey, everybody in both working groups vote or something. And the census and survey, if you don't mind me, Kay, continuing, I think belong in the securing critical working groups, securing critical software working group. Again, trying to find where they fit under the OpenSSF.
So we had talked some about what the process is for, complete. So, from the strategy committee level, we just want to make an announcement. And then, so what I would look for the TAC to do is to help figure out what process they want to use for reviewing that and getting to the point where we say, yes, we agree, these are the things we're taking, these are the groups that they belong in. So I think we had talked in some other forums about this being something that the individual working groups evaluate the items that are proposed to come to them. And then if those working groups agree, then maybe we're done. So maybe the decision is all made at the working group level. If not, does the TAC need to review it? So that's what I need to understand from this group, so that we can, from my perspective, just so that I can say it, at the end of this, we're ready to announce, and that, everyone's agreed along the way.
So it seems like one of the other pragmatic points is who works on those things. So do we already have people who've been working on the badge program that are already members of one of these working groups?
I lead the best practices badge. Yeah, I lead the best practices badge one. So that's an easy one. I can tell you all about that one. For the census and survey, Mike Dolan and I have been kind of reviewing and watching that as it goes. The actual work's being done by Harvard. It's actually funded work by the LF through, I think, the end of this year. Mike can correct me on the exact timing. And the LF security projects, those OpenSSF, it says SSL, but really SSH, sorry. OpenSSH, OpenBSD, and Linux kernel, those are all funded activities by the Linux Foundation, but loosely under the CII up to this point.
And the badging one, are there like community contributors on that, or is that purely LF staff?
Oh yeah, there's over 3,000 projects that participate. There's what, 400 people who've gotten badges. There's a it's on GitHub. There's a mailing list. There's a number of people who contribute and comment. So yeah, that one's actually quite active.
Yeah, and one of my projects went through that badging process, and we liked it a lot.
Oh, great!
I was curious as far as like how it's administered. Is it administered purely by LF staff?
Okay, as far as administration goes, yes. I mean, I'm the lead. I work for the Linux Foundation. Now, I mean, there is a governance process. Any proposed changes to criteria, there's a document on how that occurs. But as far as the, who tries to make sure that keeps running, that would be fundamentally the buck stops here. It's my problem to make sure it keeps. If there's a problem, I get the problem.
Maybe to put it another way, maybe this isn't quite what Dan was getting at, but is anybody going to be upset if this OSSF and you just decide to move this thing into one of the working groups?
No, no one will be upset.
The CII group. Okay.
Got it. Okay, I misunderstood the question. Right. No one's going to be upset. There was some confusion. If you probably didn't read I wrote this tome about transitioning to the CII. The CII officially ended after a 3-year stint. The Linux Foundation has kept some projects going because it seemed that they were valuable. Hopefully you agree that things like the badging, there's the Census and Survey work to help improve things like the Linux kernel and OpenSSH. But officially, the original steering committee, after 3 years, it kind of disbanded, and so it's been the LF's just been keep it running. And now that this group exists, it seems like a sensible thing to transition to if this group wants them. If this group doesn't, then we want to make it very, very clear, nobody's requiring you to take these on. But it would make sense for them to go to a new home, and you guys seem like the right home.
Yeah, I think my question was a little bit, would there be anybody upset? And then the complement of that is the duocracy aspect that, where are the hands that do this work? If they're already in one of those groups, then that seems like the likely home for it. And if the hands aren't going to follow the work, regardless of where it goes, then that's a separate issue.
The badge is easy. The hands are here. And if the OpenSSF decides it's part of a working group, I will immediately become, I've actually been trying to participate in all the working groups. I'll become a member of that working group, and I will try to support the working group in their decisions. So that one's easy. The Census and Survey, that's being done by Harvard. The issue there really is going to be long-term funding. But I mean, right now, what I would say is wherever they transition, they're going to have to work with them. I've actually talked with the Harvard folks about transitioning to securing critical software working group, and they said basically if the LF decides that that's what should happen, and more importantly, if the OpenSSF decides that that's what should happen, then that's what happens.
I would like to try to separate out the funding aspect. So there is the question of funding for these things, and
right.
I would like to discuss that at the governing board level. We're meeting on Thursday, and I'm proposing that we have time to discuss that. What I would like the TAC to do is look at these things from a sort of a technical and a charter perspective and see if they fit in, the TAC and the working groups, and see if they fit in. And if they do, then we should move to consolidate those and then separately work out the funding, because between the Linux Foundation and OpenSSF, we want these efforts to succeed. We want them to be in the right place. We'll make the funding happen.
So from every group I've been in all the meetings so far, it seems pretty obvious that OpenSSF is fully on board to bring these things in, right? So I don't know what we need to do to just go ahead and put this to rest and hold an official vote or whatever it is, and then we can start focusing on logistics to actually start moving these things together. But I don't think it's controversial at all from the multiple meetings I've had. Speaking of our overlap that we in the beginning of the meeting, I know it's been brought up in multiple forums in both the working groups, the TAC, and the committee meetings that, yeah, I think we want this to happen. So
I have a proposal. I'm good at making proposals. My proposal is, can we have an agenda item for this next meeting to essentially approve the consolidation of all of the identified OpenSSF and Linux Foundation items, and then that kind of, or maybe it's vote or whatever you want to call it. But I want to kind of reach, ideally we would reach resolution by the next TAC meeting, and then that creates a backup schedule where the working groups need to review and make sure that they're comfortable with those things coming into their groups, ahead of the next TAC meeting.
Do you
Added
need to
it
wait?
the backlog. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was gonna say that too, but
it is totally up to you. But it sounds to me like from the other folks that they've seen the proposal already. But again, totally up to you. I want to make that very, very clear.
Yeah, the only ones I'm not sure about is the securing critical projects working group, and I don't believe that group has discussed the census, the survey, and the existing security projects.
So it's on the agenda for this week.
Yeah. So from a TAC perspective, should we just go ahead and say the TAC approves this, and then let each working group decide where it best fits? Because I think, like I said, we've got 2 out of 3, and as Dan just mentioned, it's on the agenda coming up this week for the other one, and I don't think it's going to be controversial personally.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I guess just to get closure quickly. From a process standpoint, though, it seems to me as long as the people moving this stuff into the working group are happy and the people in the working group are happy, the TAC shouldn't necessarily need to approve. I think some of the stranger questions come around the funding stuff and making sure that a working group isn't adopting something that has strong legal expectations that it's going to be funded without making sure the governing board is aware. But that's not the case here. It sounds like even though there's funding and we want to make sure it's funded, we're not really there's no ongoing burden we're signing up for without thinking it through.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I would say that I think the TAC in this particular instance, it does kind of make sense. It just maybe seems obvious, and so it feels like maybe it's not necessary. But otherwise, like if we were to move in other initiatives into working groups without the TAC sort of being aware or informed of it, that could be problematic. Like what if the CII had a video game development arm? I don't, like we would say, hey, that probably doesn't fit, right? Unless it was to somehow teach security best practices. I don't know, but so I would say just as a formality, it probably makes sense to have us at least review these types of things. And in this case, I just think we're all in agreement, so it feels less necessary.
So what I'm looking at, the way I'm looking at it is a little bit different from moving stuff in. It's like, what if one of the working groups just decided they were going to launch a best practices badging thing instead of moving in an existing one? I don't think we really have a process in place for where they would present that and for the TAC to approve it.
Yeah,
you're right that we're all in agreement here, but it's like I just don't really see a distinction between moving in something existing and starting something new. And if we start wanting to vote and approve on everything, then I think it's kind of like a can of worms unless we come up with reasons why we're approving this one and not other stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I don't think we want to vote and approve everything that a working group does. I think if it fits within their charter and it makes sense, it's fine. And then if it becomes an issue, I think holistically these things will sort of fall out. Like when the quarterly update happens, and all of a sudden we find out that the developer tools group is now suddenly implementing a CRM system, right? We might go, hey, that's not right. And sort of they'll sort of self-monitor in that sense. But I don't know that we need to say, hey, before you guys can do anything, come to the TAC. That seems definitely more heavy-handed.
Just to get really clear on this one, because our time is kind of running out. So can we say that David Wheeler owns these, and he will work with, I'm signing you up, David. He will work with the working groups to find a home, and he will report back to the, TAC at the next TAC meeting on, the homes for these things.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that word ownership, but I'd be happy to report back to the TAC and about these things.
I would say you own driving the home for these.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Right. Okay. So I'll report back on the TAC. I'll make sure that each working group knows about these and start that process. And I'd be happy to report back. Although really, the working groups will probably report back as well. So I'll report back if needed. The working group themselves may report back all the TAC wants to know.
Right. But you'll
if all goes well, that should be the case, yes.
You'll dog that process to make sure it happens, okay?
There we go. Fair enough.
Okay. Okay.
So I guess from a full process, maybe what I'm trying to get at is instead of us approving, maybe like the working groups come and say they're going to do this, and if no one objects, then it's just approved. And that way the TAC still has a chance to look and make sure it's not something crazy, but we're not also setting a stance where we have to vote and approve on everything any working group decides to do. Does that make more sense?
So works
Yeah,
for me.
I agree with that.
Cool.
Definitely. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
We have a plan.
All right. So next, 2 items. So we want to, for the press release, we want to announce, I'm just calling it announce the technical initiative. So we did announce 5 of the 6 in our first press release, and this time we'd like to announce all of them that are ready to be announced. And in order to do that, for the press release, we just need 2 things. One is a short name and a short description. And then we want the short description to be aligned with the description in the README. And then a note for, and so we believe that the working groups will, come up with the name and the description. But we also want the working groups to be aware that because this is something that we're, going to be putting in a press release and then also on the OpenSSF webpage, there will be some, we are intending to do some wordsmithing at a marketing and PR level. And that's just for consistency across all of the groups. So working groups can wordsmith if they like, that's fine, but but just be aware that there'll be some additional wordsmithing. Make sense?
And so again, to be clear, these are going to get pulled out of the READMEs and not some other location?
Unless we do, what we discussed in the strategy meeting yesterday was that we'd pull them out of the READMEs. If that changes, we'll make sure to communicate with everyone. And we might even want to, create a separate little, and Ryan, you might have this, maybe we need a, separate mailing list, or at least the names of the people from each working group who are responsible for providing these, so that those people can work with marketing and PR.
Yeah, I think pulling up in the READMEs is where we want to get them from, so that these guys just have to put it in one place, and then it's consistent. But like you said, some wordsmithing. And then I have the names of everybody, but we do need to get a mailing list for all the working group, so quote leads put together. That would be very, very useful.
So which section, I'm just looking at the template you sent out, Ryan. It's not obvious which section this would get pulled from. Is it the first one, which just says like a 1-sentence description, or is it?
Yeah, I think that not necessarily a 1-sentence description, but just that brief overview of what it is. I don't know, Kay, did you want more than that for the press release? Because that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think it's a short description. I think it's more than 1 sentence. It's probably a paragraph, but maybe no more than 3 sentences.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. Did I write just 1 sentence in that first description?
I'm pulling it up now again just to check to make sure.
Brief description is what I wrote.
Okay, yeah, all right. So it's the brief description section that we're going to pull from. Cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is the press release going on Linux Foundation blog, or are we going to set up our own blog for this on the website?
We've talked about setting up our own blog. Lindsay was going to do that. We'll have to check to see where she's at, but I think we want it to be our own blog. If not, let's discuss that at the strategy committee meetings.
Sure.
Okay. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I'll just to make sure everyone's aware of the last piece that we're doing, which is that we're creating a new Get Involved experience that starts from the website. So right now we have a join button. We're going to change that to Get Involved, and we're going to make it easier for people to learn what the working groups are. And that's where, again, we'll expose this consistent names and descriptions, and then provide information about, how we'll want to link to the READMEs for each of the working groups, but then we'll probably also want to have some overview information about here's the calendar where all of the working group, meetings, where you can see where all their meeting times are. Here's how to, we record all of the meetings. Here's where you can find the recordings. So all those things, here's where you can sign up for mailing lists. So things that are consistent across all the projects we'll probably expose there as well. We're still working on what that experience looks like, and we'll, and I'm leading that, so I'll just, plan to, as we work through it, I'll give a quick update to the TAC at the meetings as we go along. So that's my part.
Excellent. Thank you, Kay. And I'll say I tried to model the get involved or the README section off of the conversations that we had around those things in the that you just listed off in the other meeting. So, all right. So we got through pretty much everything except for reviewing the remaining open issues. That was basically, we just had, I think there's some stale open issues in the TAC. I'll go through those and reach out to anybody that opened them. There's a lot that I think that we've accomplished and can just go ahead and be closed out. So I just don't want to have a backlog of sort of debt that we need to go through as time goes on. So I'll go ahead and do that. But with that, we're out of time. So thank you, everyone. Today was really, really productive. Reach out if you have things that you want to talk about for the next meeting, and feel free to put them in the agenda, future agenda as well. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.